Hey guys, long time no see. The reason I've been absent for a little bit is because, very quickly, I have been completing an entire audiobook. It's one of the things that you guys have been asking me to do, like, a ton ever since hearing that I have my own books. So I hired a voice actor. I'm literally getting it finished, hopefully within the next few days. Hopefully I can upload it pretty soon. If you don't know, I have like a whole third channel just dedicated to my books and all like the fantastic art that I've gotten commissioned. But that's why I've been absent for a little bit. So please head on over there and check that out. But I did want to come back because probably the most requested video that I've gotten in like the last series that I've done, which have been kind of like explorations of masculinity and how it intersects with modern fiction, has been Theon Greyjoy. It has been super interesting to see the reception of like my Ned Stark video and my Robert Baratheon video and even my man carrying thing videos. And I again really love doing this, and I have a whole degree in being able to talk about this type of stuff in psychology and therapy and mentoring and all that kind of stuff. So I really am excited to be able to talk about Theon, and for a few reasons. Because Theon isn't just written as an investigation of masculinity. In fact, I think the most interesting thing about Theon is that his story is way less overtly about masculinity than, let's just say, like Robert Baratheon's is, as a commentary on how a man should like live a good life. And Theon's story more overtly is simply about identity and self-security. But then it morphs, or I should say reveals itself to be about his experience as a man once you start to pay attention like to the deeper elements of his story. Theon to me has a very similar arc to like Zuko, and even in universe like Jaime, in being I think some of the more interesting representations of masculinity and identity. But I think to first really get into it, we do need to understand, I think, Theon's whole storyline as kind of like a representation of how it is so closely tied to identity, right? And so for fans of the show, you will know that Theon was a war prisoner.
The only son of Balon's to survive his foolish rebellion would be taken as a hostage against future treasons. My father even volunteered to foster the boy himself.
His father had rebelled against King Robert and Ned, and Theon was given up as a basically, well, they call it a ward, but it was a war prisoner to Ned Stark to make sure that his father never rebelled again.
Milady's whereabouts.
Milady? Your loyalty to your captors is touching. Tell me, how do you think Balon Greyjoy would feel if he could see his only surviving son has turned lackey?
Because Theon is the heir to the Iron Islands. And so just this alone, I think, is very interesting from like a cultural perspective, because Theon has effectively spent his whole life living amongst people who culturally are very different from him. He grew up believing that, you know, he was going to be a representative, like effectively descendants of royalty for this family of Iron Islanders who have this very specific insular way of living. They have their own gods, they have their own, you know, maturation ceremonies. And then at a certain point, he thought he was going to be literal royalty because his father declared himself king of the Iron Islands, the Iron King. And then he had to go through the death of his older brother. And then eventually the horrific situation of losing the war and being faced with death. And then I think having the lucky happenstance of being sent to live with Ned Stark, who was very gracious. He could have easily been sent to live with Tywin Lannister, and that would have been terrible. I shudder to think what Theon would be like having lived with Tywin. But Theon's whole storyline is based in this weird identity where he spent like half his life living in the culture that he always thought was his, and then the other half of his life living with the Starks, who I think he understood were kind of like his real family, because he had spent just as much time in the North, I think, as he did in the Iron Islands.
My real father lost his head at King's Landing.
But also understanding that he wasn't one of them, and he didn't feel like a Stark, that he was kind of just a prisoner.
It's your duty to represent your house when your father can't.
And it's not your duty, because it's not your house.
His whole storyline, which again I think is like marvelously executed, is about him choosing between these two identities, because he's just so insecure. Theon is craving approval. and you're probably going to see how this links back into masculinity, I think, at the, once we decide to get into that part of the story. But Theon desperately craves approval. It's why he went so hard for Robb Stark when Robb declared his mission.
Am I your brother? Now and always.
Now and always.
My sword is yours.
He's like, hey, yeah, I can get my father to ally with you. And I think he's being very genuine. He thinks he actually can get his dad to rebel against the Baratheons and the Lannisters. And he goes to his father, and this insecurity that he has in his identity immediately rears its head because his father convinces him, I think almost literally overnight, to betray Robb Stark, right? Like, he has no firm footing. There's nothing, I think, anchoring him to one particular way of life. And does he struggle with it? Yeah, he struggles with it. He doesn't, I think, have any type of, he doesn't like lack emotions or a conscience, but I think if anything, that's worse because like he knows what he's doing probably isn't right, but he has to prove himself because he's trying to figure out like who he is. And of course, what this leads to is him betraying Robb, him making an utter fool of himself in the capture of Winterfell, him getting betrayed by his own men, and then him being captured by Ramsay and losing his identity completely, right? So he becomes Reek. It again, beautiful storytelling by George R. R. Martin. Like the dude who was so conflicted about who he was, the greatest tragedy for him to experience is somebody else deciding that for him, right? And making it the lowest of the low, because that was another really big thing with Theon, to be able to understand again the scope of his narrative in full. If we think thematically for the story, is that he always had considered himself essentially, if not royalty, right next to it. He was always Theon Greyjoy, heir to the Iron Islands. He was a lord, and he made sure every time a person was beneath him to be able to let them know that.
My father is Balon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands.
What's that got to do with you? If your father's Lord, how can you be Lord too?
I will be Lord after my
So
father.
you're not Lord now?
It was this consistent callback to this kind of like imagined position, because to him that gave him power, that gave him some type of security, that gave him leverage over people.
And the heir to Pike and the Iron Islands. The only living son of Balon Greyjoy. Me.
It allowed him to have power in a lot of situations, because insecure people who don't have a firm grasp on their identity, they are desperate to be able to seem like they're secure. And that was one of Theon's thing. But Ramsay, of course, took it away from him. And across that journey, even though what happened to Theon is terrible, like absolutely horrible, he was able to co-opt that experience in having lost his identity, having to adopt a completely new being. He was able to work from basically ground zero. Everything was knocked down, and he got to construct a new identity and a new reality for himself, to the point where he became a person that we could all kind of love and essentially think of as like a fan favorite towards like season 7 and 8.
Theon. You're a good man.
Because of the redemption that he was able to go on. But all of that good, I think, storytelling was only possible because of where he started and all the trials and tribulations that came with his identity and the construction of it, going into the loss of his identity as Reek, and then the reconstruction of his identity in being able to help the Starks after he had betrayed them. And again, all of this not only is like really well done, it doesn't really overtly have anything to do with masculinity. Theon's story, if you were not to have watched the show and you were just to have, I think, read a bit about it, like the synopsis or whatnot, you would totally think it was similar to like a Jaime Lannister situation or a Zuko, where it's who they are, it's their familial ties, it's loyalty to their father and like daddy issues that are like the commentary and the real driving force, and they're all done excellently. But there is a huge difference between Theon and Jamie and Zuko. And the big difference is how Theon sees women. And I know this is going to initially sound insane, but this goes far deeper than you may have even realized. I'm doing a rewatch of Game of Thrones with my girlfriend right now, and so I can only really record these when she's out of the house because I don't want to spoil anything for her. But watching the show back over again, the whole idea for this video actually came from the fact that I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't believe Theon ever interacts with a woman where he doesn't see her as a sex object in the first 3 seasons. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that every time Theon even slightly has a scene where he converses with a woman, it's always having to do with wanting to have sex with her. And this is like the big issue with Theon's identity, right? Because again, thematically, his whole story is about identity, but the identity goes one step further, in that he has not just a lack of like a familial or a cultural identity, he has a lack of like a personal identity and like a masculine identity, because he's completely insecure. And here's what I'm talking about, just to be able to like give some examples of how like deep this goes. Let's see if I can find it.
Impudent. It means rude, disrespectful. Do you want to lose that chain?
Theon Greyjoy.
So, in case people don't know, this is shortly after Osha gets captured, and like she's in chains. And again, Theon, this is his first scene, I'm pretty sure, ever with her. And the very first thing he tries to do when interacting with her is use his position of power as her captor in order to get her to have sex with him, right? For like the advantage of it, for her freedom. And obviously we can realize like, oh, that's really bad. like Theon, and this probably is, I think, the most exaggerated example of how he interacts and views women, because he does not view Osha in this scene as like a full person, like not at all. Not even close. He doesn't consider anything about her. If we want to go like even deeper, obviously, there's this scene that's like probably, again, one of his most famous scenes involving women.
Your blood will be in the sea if I don't watch where I'm going.
I have a proposal for my father. The one that we're making king again. And me after him. You may get to stay in a castle tonight if you're lucky.
Is that an offer from my future king?
An order from your future king.
So, obviously, we know that's his freaking sister. And what makes this more crazy is that, again, Theon had met his sister, who he doesn't know. Like, he just thinks this is a random chick. He had met this chick, maybe 20, 30 minutes ago. He meets her after getting off the docks. You can see him, like, coming basically from his ship, like, here. He meets her, has a conversation with her, and could not even fathom the idea of her being his sister, that he thought, oh, she must be here to be able to suck my dick, right? And then he goes like, yeah, that's an order from your future king. And like, even though he was joking, he's like, not really joking, because if she is a peasant, like he thinks she is, what's she gonna say? No. And that's not even really the wildest thing about this whole meeting. If it weren't crazy enough that he would just see a chick and instantly make moves on her on horseback after like 15 minutes of meeting her. The other thing to realize is that some people might say, oh, well, he just has like, you know, like a really high sex drive. I mean, like, one, I don't think a sex drive is going to make you want to, like, you know, be a predator to a woman in chains like that scene with Osha. But even if that is your defense, there's this whole scene that unfortunately there's not a clip for. But there's this chick, the captain's daughter. And the reason I bring this up is that Theon literally moments before trying to hook up with who he doesn't know is his sister, Theon has sex with this woman. Like, coming into port, right? The captain's daughter waits in his bed naked. She asks him if the castle is as he remembered, and he says it looks smaller, right? So like, he's had sex with the captain's daughter like right before coming onto land. And again, you would think, oh, aren't you clear enough headed now since you got your rocks off and are literally looking at like your familial castle to not need to do it? And no, but that's the thing. What I want to impart upon people who are watching this is that for men who see women as sex objects, it's not about the sex. Sure, that's like a cool bonus, but it's not about the sex. It's about your ability to assert power over people who you view as objects and tools. It's about the experience of, because of your insecurity, needing to have some type of authority over others. And this is how I think we can consider Theon's fragile masculinity in relation to femininity, because I would argue it is impossible to be as sex crazed and misogynistic as Theon is without also being masculinely insecure at the same time. And a big part of that comes from the fact that if you do view women as sex objects, a really devious subconscious part of that type of lifestyle is that you cannot possibly be secure, because sex objects and tools, if viewed in that way, are not meant to deny their purpose. So if a man views a woman as only being able to be useful insofar as her ability to be submissive and please him physically, when she rejects him, usually that man's insecurity reveals itself, and you're going to see them instantly sink into like childlike behavior because it's an attack on them, right? Like it's like, oh, you can't reject me. Like I'm supposed to be the person in control. You're a whore, you're a slut. You know, like other men aren't as good as me. You'll never have like the right experiences with another man as like I can give to you. Or they'll go like, you're worthless. You weren't even worth having sex with in the first place. And a secure man would just go, oh, okay, you don't want to be with me? That's fine. All right, live your life. But again, if you think in the position of women existing to serve you and you only ever consider women as tools and objects, then you would become like, imagine if you were like a freaking lumberjack and then an axe wouldn't be swung by you. You think like, oh, there must be something wrong with this axe. Like, I'm the lumberjack. Why is this axe refusing to cut this tree? It can't be me. So like for men who view women only in the terms of how well they can bounce on it, like it must be something wrong with them. And again, there is a scene of Theon for this.
I found a ship heading south in White Harbour.
And you can afford that?
Some of my friends are more generous than others,
There's 1,000 girls like you in King's Landing.
so I'll have lots of company.
Yes, you'll be very popular. Until some fat lord comes to visit with a big belly and a little prick, and he can't get it up, so he knocks all your teeth out.
Or what will happen to me if I stay here?
So again, here it's Theon. Of course, he's already had sex with Rose. The first scene of them together is them having sex, by the way. So Theon hears that Rose is leaving because there's a freaking war, and immediately goes, oh, you're not special. You know, like, you're leaving me, you're rejecting me. Like, there's 1,000 girls like you. You won't be, you're nobody. And other men that you're gonna meet, they're gonna be like disgusting and fat, and they'll be violent. I'm better than them. You should stay here. Like, I'm the best you're ever gonna get. It's not like, oh wow, you know, like, I'm sad to see you go, or like, stay safe. Theon cannot fathom the idea of this woman trying to avoid war because she's a peasant, and tries to convince her, hey, yeah, it's like, just stay here and suck my dick because that's what you're supposed to do. And it's again, a really sad way to live, because you wouldn't necessarily think, I think innately, that this much preoccupation with being dominant to women in a sex situation would have anything to do with masculinity. But again, taking a deeper dive in, you start to realize you can't have a good relationship with yourself or your gender identity if you don't recognize the value in other gender identities, right? Simply because we share a world with them, and the world exists with them in it. And there is no way for you to think lesser of them and healthily exist in the world. Like it comes down to you have to interact with them at some point, and they're going to be shaping how you view yourself, because how you interact with them is a large part of how you are going to identify to the world and to yourself. And this goes into the fact that like you also are in large part going to have to be performative for men too. Because think about it like this: if women, to the sexist, if women exist as sex objects and tools to be used, then they effectively kind of become like notches on a belt, and like trophies, and like milestones to be passed, right? And Rose is making the perfect face here for that. It is disgusting. And the idea then becomes, okay, it's not just about me having power and dominance over women or even enjoying sex, but I kind of have to sleep with women because other guys are sleeping with women.
Your next tumble with Rouse is on me. I'll try not to wear her out.
Right? Like, if they're just objects and it's just tools, and part of my identity is how well I can use this tool, socially, people are just naturally competitive, right? Like literally just for like a resource thing. It doesn't matter who you are, man, woman, it literally doesn't matter. People will always compete for resources, right? And when you start looking at women as resources, you're gonna compete against other men for them.
What are you saying? These ladies enjoyed him so much they gave him the time for free?
Is that what you're telling us? Sit down, Podrick.
And because they're probably emotionally and masculinely fragile men, you start to do really stupid things to be able to impress the men, because men aren't sex objects. Men's opinions have worth and value, right? Like, this is literally the entire reason. Let me see if I can find it.
They're not going to respect you until you prove yourself.
Now am I supposed to prove myself by pillaging piss-poor fishing villages?
You're not.
And yet that's the task my father has given me, to prove that I'm a true Iron Islander.
And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, to prove that I'm a true Iron Islander, right? Like, he has to have these other men consider him to be what he always wants to be. And that's the definition of insecurity, especially when it's related to masculinity. It's like, oh, I've been told that I'm supposed to do these things, and I care about the opinions of men because women don't have real opinions because they're not real people. And so in order to be able to be all that I am supposed to be, and because I don't have my own security, my masculinity, I have to then do things that other men will be proud of.
I'll lock him in a cell until he rots right.
He has to pay the iron price. They'll never respect you while he lives.
And for Theon, that's attacking Winterfell, which is like the dumbest thing he could have ever done. He Dagmar says like they don't do as they're told, they do as they like. And, Theon needs to prove it to his father. But it's insane that he would even start to convince himself that that's like a good idea. It's the beginning of his downfall, obviously. But I think this all leads into the fact that like so much of Theon's problems comes from the fact that his entire identity is like situated on this extremely fragile, shaky ground of his sex relationship to women and how they're beneath him. I might have said this once before in this video, but Theon doesn't have, again, I think a single scene with a woman that he's not trying to have sex with. I don't think he ever like speaks to Catelyn Stark. I think at least, again, in like the first like 3-4 seasons, I don't think he speaks to Arya or like Sansa. Like every scene that he has, it's him either with men or I guess like his sister, like Yara. But that's another thing, is that like he really can't even conceive of Yara's existence, like a woman being in a position of power.
She can't lead an attack.
And why not?
You're a woman!
You're the one in skirts.
This isn't Winterfell, boy. Your sister took over command of your eldest brother's ship after your new father killed him. What's dead?
It's I don't know if there's anything more blatant to say than that. Like, he doesn't even like consider the fact that a woman could possibly be in a traditionally like masculine position. It like just straight up like doesn't compute with him, and it doesn't I think like flow. He doesn't even know how to treat his sister anymore. Like think of his own position to his father, especially because his father seems to think that Yara's doing a much better job than Theon ever would. And this all goes into, I think, the more insidious idea that like, let's just say we didn't even discuss these kind of issues with insecurity, right? About if your identity is based in how well you can use tools, and you see women as sex objects and tools, that so much of who you are becomes tied into women and tied into caring about the opinions of men. Even if that weren't the case, what happens is that you can become completely blinded from being able to see like reality because of a literal need from yourself to feed this identity that you had about you needing to be with women sexually, right? And so this is portrayed in a few ways. There's the scene where Theon has taken over Winterfell, and you know how he gets tricked and allows Bran and Rickon to escape? Osha comes and seduces him. She goes to his chambers stating that she wants her freedom in exchange. He initially agrees, and the two have sex. And then she's able to steal away Bran and Rickon when he's fallen asleep. And again, like any rational person would think like, maybe I shouldn't have sex with the woman that is my prisoner and fall asleep next to her, leaving her, the freedom to roam around the castle. Like maybe she's trying to trick me. And again, this goes like even deeper. After Theon got captured, he has been tortured for weeks and is again tricked into a sexual situation with women because he literally can't think of it himself like otherwise, right? Here is like Miranda and Violet enter the torture cellar in which Theon is being kept hostage, release him, put him on a bed. They then attempt to seduce him, claiming they have heard to the air. The air of Pike is well endowed. And so, Violet and Miranda sexually manipulate Theon. He initially is just like, no, I shouldn't do this. This has to be a trick. And they keep insisting. And he goes, I guess this is real. And this is in the Dreadfort after his torture has already been going on for weeks and weeks. And his own mind can't keep him from being manipulated. And this is how men so often become completely limited in their kind of like relationships and interactions with women, because their dick just completely overrides their brain, and you can't make educated decisions anymore. Because for a man who thinks of women as existing to please him, this type of behavior isn't out of the ordinary, right? It's like, oh, it's not weird that this is happening because this is what they're supposed to do. And then you start being completely swindled, taken advantage of, you can't think clearly. And Theon clearly doesn't think clearly in any of these situations. I mean, he's not the smartest guy to begin with, but you see how you can be taken advantage of. And then of course what happens is if you're insecure and you get manipulated, or you get rejected, or sexual situations don't go the way you want, or a plethora of other things, you start to resent women. You start to think like, if they don't want to be with me, they're not fulfilling their purpose. Or if they're not having my kids, they're not fulfilling their purpose. Or, if they're not homekeeping, they're not fulfilling their purpose. And because they might be looked at as tools, because the root of it all is you having power over them, and you being in a situation where they're meant to be used in this way to please you and to please your satisfactions. If they don't do those things, you're just like, yeah, why wouldn't I be angry? Why wouldn't I try to create situations to more easily make it so that they can do the things that I want? Why do women need like financial freedoms? Why do women need like political freedoms?
I think my sister is her husband's property, yes. When a bride is walking down the aisle to marry the groom, the father walks next to her and gives her away. True or false?
Absolutely. But it can cascade into thinking like they don't need like education, intelligence, and you start to kind of like slowly morph into a person that blames women for even shortcomings in your own life. Because if only you had someone to like, support you, or to give you a release, or you don't have a family because women don't understand you, or, you know, they don't know how good you actually are in bed. And it limits you from like self-reflection. And a huge point about this is that it's like a circular thing, right? Because a lot of men in these positions of being insecure will also find women who are insecure, are going to very easily lap up the bottom of the barrel, which then kind of like reinforces the position of these men to not have to be self-investigative. And honest to God, that was probably going to happen to Theon, but the show took a drastic turn in that it uses a really cool narrative device and where it starts to, well, I guess completely takes away the thing that is most centered to Theon's identity. And there's two things, and one of them is bigger than the other. And it happens multiple times throughout storytelling. But for Theon, it was his dick, right? Like he just got his dick chopped off. It's probably also the reason why I'm so confident in saying that Theon's journey is really about masculinity. It's about his relationship with women through sex in a covert way, because so much of the story completely changes when he doesn't have the ability to have sex with women anymore, and when he's trained not to see them that way. So one of the big things narratively, just to be able to think about, is the idea that in a fiction, you take away something central to a character to be able to change them going forward. I actually made a video about this, and it's taking away a character's power to see how they like evolve and change. Some really good examples of this is like Spider-Man 2. Probably, I think at this point, either like a top 2, 3, or 1 Spider-Man movie for a lot of people, aside from like Across the Spider-Verse. But in Spider-Man 2, Peter Parker just like loses his powers for some psychosomatic reason that's never really explained, and he has to learn what it means to be Peter and what it means to be Spider-Man in the absence of his powers, and what makes him a hero and what makes him him. And I think it's a really cool investigation of it. You know, on the flip side, you have it with villains. You know, Ozai thought that might makes right in Avatar, and Aang took away his firebending at the end because he was going to use firebending as a reason to be able to try to like take over the world, and it was most central to Ozai, so he took away his power so he no longer could have that might makes right mentality. And then of course it happens in Game of Thrones as well, most famously with the Lannisters. You know, like Jaime is like a prodigal swordsman and his hand gets cut off, and that's when he's able to make his biggest transformation and be with Brienne and be weak and not be able to defend himself and have to like really consider his position, and where he grows the most, right? That was taken away from him. Cersei, her biggest things was her position of power and her beauty. And so what happened to her? She got her hair cut off and she was stripped of all of her power, right? Like the High Sparrow took her, walked her through the city, embarrassed her, humiliated her, literally made her naked, took away everything that she had considered making up herself. And for Cersei, she obviously went the opposite direction and became much worse because of it. But it's a very typical thing in fiction to be able to say, hey, this thing that has like, you know, a person's identity, we're going to strip it from them and then see where the pieces fall. And it provides a lot of opportunity for a writer. And in Theon's case, it was his dick, right? Like, because that was his whole thing. Every scene with a woman, it's him having sex, and it's supposed to be because, you know, like he has a big dick, and that was the center of his masculinity. And for Theon, the other thing that got taken away obviously was his last name, well, his whole name, I guess, you know, being a Greyjoy, because he would lord that over people too. But that was again more in line with him being insecure. And so because of all this, because of him being tortured, because of him failing, he was named Reek and had his whole pseudo royal noble lineage completely ripped away from him. And then he also had his dick and balls cut off and had to construct like a completely new foundation for himself because of no longer even either having power or being able to engage in the act that he thought his life was like centered around. And two, I think the show is pretty blatant in that Theon's greatest struggles are sex-based, because like this scene happens.
Take off his pants. I'm gonna fuck you into the dirt.
No, please. No.
I mean, like, it's pretty unambiguous that the show is trying to tell us that the punishment that Theon deserves for all of his terrible actions is completely revolved around sex. Now, do I have a lot of negative feelings around fiction using sexual violence as a means of simply torturing a character and having that character experience like pain and suffering seemingly for like no reason to move the plot forward? 100%, yeah. Tons of stories do this. I think sexual violence is a uniquely terrible thing that can really affect people watching fiction, and I think it's our responsibility as creatives to be able to consider that. But be that as it may, I think in this scene here, Theon is one of like maybe the only men in the show to experience this level of overt sexual violence, or at least sexual threats. And it's all based in what is supposed to be most, one, terrifying for him as a character, and most thematic. And it comes back to Theon's entire identity being about how he had power in sexual situations, how he could make people, women, objects for his pleasure. And here it's another man doing that to him. And truly, I think it's the long game that was played for Theon, because once he has kind of like that groundwork taken away from him, you know, like being castrated, losing his name and his identity, that's when he gets to reconstruct everything into having a much better relationship with women, funny enough. Like, again, I would never wish for what happened to Theon to happen to anybody, but Theon, at the end of his story, is like a massive advocate for women in positions of power.
And she is your rightful ruler. Those of you that have sailed under her, and there are many of you here, you know what she is. She is a reaver. She is a warrior. She is ironborn. We will fight.
It's again really cool to see the transformation, because he started off objectively thinking that women were not fit to rule, not fit to lead. It's the same thing with Sansa. He becomes like Sansa Stark's like biggest advocate, right? And eventually that gets her to be in the position where she's queen in the North. So much of Theon's major moments become about protecting women, become about sympathizing with women. You know, when Sansa has to deal with Ramsay, Theon is there. Theon understands firsthand what that's like. And Theon is even able to, I think, have a really cool narrative moment of changing or reframing the torture that created this new identity into a strength. Yeah, like, you know, he gets freaking kicked in the balls. And again, not worth losing your dick and balls over. But it's thematically, it's kind of like a moment where it's his power now, right? It's not something that's limiting him. It's not something that he's ashamed of. It's something that's actually giving him an advantage, you know, against this man. And for Theon, his transformation, and it's one of the I think few fully fledged, really cool storylines that we got to see for all of Game of Thrones, because we know how bad season 7 and 8 were. For Theon, it is really awesome to be able to see, I think upon a closer look, just like how insanely, almost over the top sexist he was, and how much sex played into his own identity, and how he lived his entire life, and how his worth was tied up in his ability to be a Greyjoy and to be with women and to use that as power. Because again, all of this is linked to power and security. Insecure people, insecure men, insecure women, insecurity feels terrible. And for the insecure, immature person, the answer to that is to have power over other people, because perceived authority is the cure for insecurity. But it's not real. That's not how you actually gain security. You gain security by being able to understand, I don't need to be approved by others. I have to be happy and loving to myself. I can't allow my self-worth to be determined by what others think of me or how I get others to act. I can't control other people. I can only control myself. And I have to align with the types of things that I believe in. And I have to have goals for myself and wants and dreams. And they can't be wrapped up in only making other people do things that I wish, or only doing things that other people want me to do, right? You were supposed to be like the master of your own life. And I think the Theon, at first, he was completely, utterly dominated by needing to be things that other people wanted. I mean, like, there's, I think, a scene here.
Even if by some miracle I slipped through the lines and made it home, I'd be a coward, the Greyjoy who ran.
I've known you many years, Theon Greyjoy. You're not the man you're pretending to be.
I've gone too far to pretend to be anything else.
It's this whole inability to have a secure identity because he is so concerned with not being an embarrassment, not being ashamed, with being accepted by his people and his culture. And again, I'm not saying that Theon had an easy life or this was an easy decision to make. I think being a prisoner from the time you're like 8 years old, watching your family die, and then being sent to live with the people who killed your family in a completely different culture, I think that would mess with anybody's head. I am not diminishing what he's gone through. I am simply, I really am trying to say that the way that he's coped with these things, the lack of power that he feels that he has, is completely ineffectual, right? Like him searching and craving for some type of approval in order to sate this lack of love that he has for himself, oftentimes through, again, the authority and power and security that comes with dominating women sexually, and then through seeking the approval of men because he values them over everything else. It is not a way to live. And I'm so happy that across the show we got to see a more fully realized, fully him Theon. And it's crazy that it happened because of his resiliency through torture, through him losing his dick, through him not being able to have sex anymore. It was the thing that like defined him, and he was able to move past that and find a new definition for himself. And that's really cool. It's really cool writing. So yeah, I've already been talking for way too long. It's been almost an hour. I don't know why you guys even watch these. They're far too long. But yeah, check out that third channel if you really want to support me. It's chock full of, I think, really cool videos. I'm going to make even more coming out soon. I have one in the works. Look out for that audiobook that I was telling you guys about. If you guys want me to talk about literally anything else, probably Zuko is going to be next if I'm honest, but keep on giving me advice. And yeah, I'll do what I can. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. If you're here, subscribe, click, dance, throw your hands up, cry, laugh, shake, piss, anything you want to do. And I'll be back at some point in the future.